We definitely have a major shock. And I have the feeling that many have underestimated the ability of Iran to cause so much disruption.
What's happening with the energy sector slash oil and gas industry right now?
Many people are trying to get their head around what is happening today, but we definitely have a major shock that has affected the biggest oil and gas producers and exporters in the world. We have seen not only energy infrastructure in the region, in countries that have nothing to do with the war, by the way, like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, even Iraq and Bahrain. These countries have nothing to do with the war, but they happen to be in that neighborhood. And Iran has been attacking their energy infrastructure. But I would say the biggest disruption that we are seeing today is because the Iranians have blocked the Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz is a very tiny water passage whereby you have almost 20% of global oil trade. So about 20% of the oil that is traded globally comes through that little narrow strait. And the same thing for liquefied natural gas, or what we call LNG. Also around 20% goes through that strait. And as a result, we have serious supply disruption in the world from oil and gas. And that's why we're seeing prices jumping almost every day. And we are seeing levels that we have not seen for years now.
Is this essentially, when you get down to it, supply and demand?
I think it's primarily supply at the moment. So what we have is a supply shock. But I wouldn't say that's the only direction. This is not the only direction we're heading into, because if, for example, the US convinces other powers such as the French or other European powers, or even the Asian like the Chinese or the Japanese, to help them to secure the oil tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, then as long as we see some tankers moving across that strait, it kind of take away some of the pressure we are seeing on oil prices. And of course, if the war ends tomorrow, then we should see a rapid correction in prices. However, at the moment, we're really all sailing in the fog. Nobody knows how long the current disruptions are going to continue.
How does this kind of ripple throughout the whole rest of the economy?
Often we don't understand the importance of oil to our modern society. I mean, it's amazing. This is an industry which is more than a century old and still has such a major impact on global economy. I would say oil is king in the transport sector. Even if we have electric vehicles, they are not big enough to cause a dent in the demand for oil. But also, where you're sitting now, if you look around you, many products have an oil component into them. Plastic, medicine, oil, perfume, makeup, some clothes. So there is always an element of petroleum into that. And when you have this input becoming more expensive, then the higher cost is going to affect the final price of some of the products that we are buying. So this is where oil has an impact on the economy. However, today oil is by far less important than what we saw in the 70s. So for those of you people who are interested, they can go online, check the oil crisis of 1973, and they would see people queuing at petrol stations in the US. A huge economic problem resulted from that. But that's when oil was really much more important, because we did not develop alternatives. Our dependence on oil in terms of intensity, oil intensity is half what it used to be in the 70s. And that's why I want to say here something that may sound a bit crazy, but for oil prices to be only hovering around 100 is not too bad, given the scale of the problem that we have in the Middle East. If the same crisis would have happened perhaps 20, 30 years ago, I bet you would have seen prices perhaps 200 or even much higher than that.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I've noticed is like, oh, I thought this would be worse by now, considering how big of a problem that this seems to be over there.
Exactly.
If you were to kind of quantify this in terms of the importance of the global economy, because I think in terms of like 1 through 10, so to speak, in the 1970s, it would have been like number 1, 2, 3.
So let's say maybe in the 70s it was 1, because it was accounting for more than, on its own, for more than half of our needs, globally energy needs. And today it's perhaps 3.
So one of the things that has kind of come out is Iran said oil could be $200 a barrel. What would that look like?
Not pleasant. It's going to look nasty, but people don't realize that actually we've been there before. 2008, just before the financial crisis and the global economic crisis, prices were above perhaps $200 a barrel. Also, around 2022, we saw prices much higher than way much higher than what we are seeing today. That's when Russia invaded Ukraine. But most importantly, when we started this year in January, everybody was expecting that we were going to have what we call surplus in supply. There is much more supply than what we needed. And that kind of gave us some safety cushions. However, if we started the year in an already tight situation where demand would be booming and supply, we didn't have enough supply, then I would say it would have been a much nastier scenario. So yes, I think the Iranians want to see $200 a barrel because they think that's what causes some serious economic pain. But I mean, honestly, I think they need to revisit the market fundamentals and understand that oil markets today are very different from when they were in the 70s and the 80s.
Is this more kind of a political problem than it is an actual economic problem then? Because here in the United States, like gas prices go up, people are going to lose their minds.
I would say it's more of a political problem. It was caused by a political problem. Every time prices of energy increase, they become a political problem because governments don't like to see energy prices increasing because energy meets our basic needs. And if you have discontent among people, the average person in the street, because they are paying more now on higher energy prices, especially if they did not really vote for that problem to happen, then you have to think twice and think, oh my goodness, what shall I do? And this is for me the danger, because often I have seen problems caused by governments overreacting to ease pressure on prices than by the actual problem itself. So the reason why we had queues in those pictures in the 70s is not that because we suddenly did not have oil, it's just governments introduced, let's say, some rationing.
How bad is it that it's happening in Iran? Could this be would this have been worse if it was happening in another country?
I would say yes, if the same problem would have occurred elsewhere, not let's say a war on Iran, but a war let's say on Nigeria or a war on Venezuela, we would not have seen the same impact. The second part I want to say is that you're talking about Iran, and I have the feeling that many have underestimated the ability of Iran to cause so much disruption.
Do you feel like Iran's strategy is specifically just to target the price of oil? And if they can just make oil...
Yes, definitely. I mean, they know how important energy prices are for the West, for democratic governments, and especially for those who are heading towards elections.
When you kind of look at this from an oil and gas energy perspective compared to other events that have happened throughout recent history, where would this kind of compare? Is this bigger, smaller, the same?
Well, in terms of scale, it is the biggest disruption because we have never seen disruption from the Strait of Hormuz to this level. I mean, we did see big disruption around the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, but it was more contained. In terms of impact on oil prices, no. It's actually one of the milder crises that we have seen if we want to identify the major supply shocks that have happened throughout the history of the industry.
But do you think that impact on kind of the prices, will that continue being less than other crises into the future? Or is that just, no, that's just at the moment?
It depends on whether we are going to see the worst case scenario. We're not in the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is not just a lasting war, a lasting conflict, lasting disruptions. For me, coming from the region, the worst case scenario would entail having the other countries in the region, the other major oil producers in the region, and you are talking about giants, Saudi Arabia, for example, dragged into the war beyond what we have seen so far, in a sense that they will join this war more actively. That might perhaps accelerate the end of the war, but I think it will, again, the damage there might become more widespread in a sense that Iran might become more aggressive in its retaliation, and it would really perhaps inflict more serious damage on the infrastructure, energy infrastructure in the region. And also there are its proxies, the Houthis and Hezbollah in Lebanon. They are, yes, much more weaker than perhaps before, but they can still also cause trouble elsewhere.
You may have kind of touched on this already, but one of the things that I didn't understand was like, well, why is Iran attacking other countries? I didn't understand that part of it.
That was the question that I asked myself angrily when the conflict started. But I think what they want to cause is disruption. They want to cause panic. They want to try to use the Gulf countries as a tool to exercise pressure on the US, on Iran, to end their attacks, because they say, look, guys, we are suffering here. We have to bring this to an end. But there's also another reason, which could be not necessarily a standalone reason, but supplementing what I just said, that the fact that Iran has certain missiles, short range, makes those countries an easier target than, let's say, using long-haul missiles. Excuse my non-technical jargon. I'm not a military expert. Yes, but it's an easier target to attack your neighbor than to send your missile all the way, let's say, to Tel Aviv or elsewhere.
Are you ready for some harder/listener submitted questions about this?
Oh my goodness, tell me about it.
What was your first reaction when this broke out?
I asked why. I asked why now, because I know that there were ongoing negotiations.
Is there a timeline you would say that, like, okay, if this goes on for a total of 3 months, or if it goes on for 6 months, like, where do you think in that timeline this gets really bad?
Whenever you sail in the fog without any clear end in sight, that creates volatility in the market. So, and you can see it actually when you observe the price, how it is traded every day. You can see it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. So that makes it very difficult to plan, to invest, to prepare clear budgets, let's say, for several years. That said, we should not lose sight of the potential impact on demand. There is what we call demand destruction. We know that demand reacts to higher prices. So the longer we remain in this high price territory, the more the demand destruction is going to be visible, and that by itself can help in easing the pressure on prices. So it's never one card or one factor. It's a combination. It's very dynamic. But the rule of thumb today, I would say, the more disruptions we have from the region, the longer they last, the more we are likely to stay in the current price level that we are seeing.
Is there a more strategically important area in terms of oil and gas than the Strait of Hormuz?
No, in terms of capacity, that is the most important, and not only in terms of volume, but also because there is no other options. So, for example, when we had the issue in the Red Sea, whether because of the attacks that we saw in the Red Sea, or when there was that big ship, was it Evergreen, that blocked, for example, the Suez Canal.
It got stuck there, or something.
So it was not the end of the world, because ships could go around, let's say, African continent and then reach, let's say, the European market, etc. So it just added delays to the routes that the ships were taking, but it did not cause losses of supply. The Strait of Hormuz is really like the exit of a lake. You don't have any other option.
Who benefits?
Oh my goodness, I can think of quite a few. People don't realize that actually volatility is fantastic business for some traders because they make a lot of money from buying and selling, and they are on high, buy this, sell that. I can see oil producers outside the region are benefiting a lot, even though, for example, the US is in a peculiar state because they are a big consumer, but they are also big producers. So I think the American oil producers may be benefiting from windfalls, higher profits, abnormal profits because of these high prices. I would say other producers around the world are also benefiting from those prices. People who run, let's say, shipping industry, the rate of renting a tanker, for example, has increased significantly. So it's never going to be a clear cut that, oh, we only have losers because we're thinking from our perspective as consumers. I'm pretty sure there are lots of people out there that I have not mentioned that are also benefiting from what's going on in the region.
So the United States has the Strategic Oil Preserve, or whatever the exact name of it is. Does releasing that make a difference, or is that just a drop in the bucket?
It does definitely make a difference, and they are called Strategic Petroleum Reserves, SPR. And the reason why we accumulate them is exactly for these kind of situations. You put oil in storage so that if there is a serious shortage in the market, you can compensate by releasing some of those and therefore ease the pressure on price. And I think if we did not have those in reserves, you would have seen probably oil prices much higher than the levels that we are seeing today. So it's not that their release is going to really bring oil prices back to 60 when the war is ongoing in the Middle East. For me, I see the importance of the SPRs, or the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is to put a lid or a ceiling on prices and stop them from going at much higher levels than we would have seen if we did not have those SPRs. But of course, there are lots of questions that we want to know about the release. It's not like you open the tap, those barrels suddenly start flowing in the market. They may take time to hit the market actually. And I think there were some details still missing that people want to know. What kind of oil will be released, because not all oil is the same. There are different grades, different types. So there are still missing details, but at least it gives some kind of safety cushion.
How long does it kind of take once things go back to normal to get back to normal? Like, let's just say this all ends today, right as we're done. How long would it take for everything to kind of kick back on and be normal again?
I think we should go back to normality pretty quickly. Again, because this is not like we lost production or fields have been set on fire, as we saw, for example, with the Gulf War many years ago. Those fields are still producing, but producers have reduced their production rate because they have run out of places to store their oil produce because they cannot export it. So while it's not going to be immediate, let's say, suddenly opening the tap, because sometimes it takes some time to restart production from an existing field. It's a bit technically a little bit more challenging, but we don't have structural damage to say, oh, it's going to take a long, long time. So I would say relatively quite quickly, we can go back to normality. And that's why if you saw last week oil prices, the second we start talking about, oh, perhaps the war is going to end very soon, we saw prices dropping to 80, from 120 to 80 suddenly. But then when people saw, oh my goodness, that's going to last a bit longer, then we went back to the 100 territory.
For the people who are in that region, are they really worried about oil, or are they more looking at the political ramifications of all of this? Like, I think in the United States, most people are just, oh gosh, the price of oil, right? And then everything else filters from that. Is that the same in that region? Or is there what's kind of the number one thing that they're concerned about?
They are worried, yes, because of what happens next, but they are also angry because they didn't ask for what's happening at the moment and because they have been attacked. But typically, when you think of the Middle East, you tend to think of Israel and Hamas and Lebanon, and they are fighting all the time, and there's instability. But the Gulf region has invested a lot of time, money, and effort to create this image of a safe haven. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, even Saudi Arabia later on, announcing massive projects, massive investment opportunities across the economy, AI, tourism, you name it, And then suddenly you have this shock happening that kind of, I don't want to be too pessimistic and too dramatic and say destroyed everything that the region has built, but it has definitely changed the risk perception that you would usually allocate to the region. People who want to put more money in the region in the future, they'd be thinking twice. People who want to move and live in the region, like expats who want to go and settle in the region, they would be thinking twice. It's like, oh, hold on a minute. We thought it was all about Lebanon and Gaza. So this is, I would say, where the anger and the frustration comes from, much more than what are they worried about and whether the oil price will go up or down.